Welcome to this Jeremy Bamber and White House Farm podcast, season 4, and our second episode in our mini-series of Police Lives, where Yvonne and I discuss officers DS Stanley Jones and DI Robert Miller. So we're going to move on to DS Stanley Brian Jones now, but I think it's probably important to talk about why the police changed their view from murder-suicide, as was obviously the scene, to thinking that that Jeremy was involved. So how did that all come about in the beginning, Yvonne?
Well, I believe personally that it began because due to the pressure on a relentless daily basis from the relatives of Jeremy, the wider family. How that came about was on the day after the incident, the relatives were at Jeremy's house after he'd been to the solicitor with the executor of the wills, who was Basil Cock, who was Neville's accountant. Now, upon learning that they were going to inherit very, very little from the estate, just a matter of a few pounds, the wider family that day went to Essex Police and formally, for the first time, said that they suspected Jeremy. This was then a continual daily bombardment of Essex Police. And obviously, Taft Jones knew at the time that this was a simple open and shut case of murder-suicide. They'd had the movement in the window. They'd evidence that there was life inside the house. He knew that Jeremy could not have been responsible.
Yeah.
And Annie was that frustrated at Taft Jones that she had a go at him, basically, and said he went red in the face and acted like a bull and everything, because he was like adamant that Jeremy had no culpability at all in this incident. But they carried on and were, like I say, they were relentless in pursuing the police.
Yeah, they were hassling them every day, weren't they? They were.
Oh, every single day, yeah. Yeah, every day. And they had some police who were allies with them because they had Stan Jones, for instance, who did not like Jeremy's character from the outset. And in fact, Stan Jones did admit that, in his words, the police, were looking for anything to arrest Bamber for. So that shows his mindset from the outset. And obviously some of the police agreed with him. And I think because of mistakes that had been made and the bombardment of the relatives, that this then triggered them looking at Jeremy. They'd investigated the windows. They knew there was no way in or out of the house. That was done virtually immediately. And yet this then became a primary factor that Jeremy had got in through the downstairs shower room window and escaped the scene through the kitchen window. But none of that is evidentially accurate.
No, exactly. And I think the family made a complaint, didn't they? Because Taft Jones wasn't taking their view seriously. So that then triggered not an independent report, but a report from another officer, Canels, to look into the case. Canels' report concluded, so he essentially re-looked at the case and concluded that it was that Sheila was most likely responsible. And despite that, Taft Jones was then taken off the case and replaced with Ainsley.
That's correct, yeah. But Canels did his report on the 6th of September. So this is before Julie Mugford was arrested. This is before Jeremy was arrested for the first time. He looked at the evidence. So he looked at everything. He looked at all the statements, the crime scene photographs, the reports from the forensics and everything. And he concluded that Sheila was responsible. But on his conclusion of that, then the Chief Constable of Essex Police he just put another senior investigating officer in and swapped Taft Jones with Ainsley. And it's like, were they deliberately trying to obstruct justice? Were they deliberately trying to interfere? That's how it appears.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And through the influence of the family. So DS Jones.
And we've got to remember, Emma, that some of those police officers, the senior ones, were close to the Beauvoir family, who were the wider family. Ultimately, Ainsley got a job at the
Did?
caravan park, but they had other connections because Neville had been a JP. He knew the majority of police, and it
Yeah.
follows Robert Beauvoir would as well. And it was him and mainly Anne Eaton who pressured the police on this relentless basis. So whether it was because they were absolutely sick and fed up with them coming in, so wanted to look like they were investigating Jeremy, I very much doubt that. It all seemed to turn on its head, and then they started suspecting Jeremy with absolutely no evidence whatsoever.
It's perfect for DS Stan Jones because he didn't like Jeremy from the outset, did he?
No, I didn't like him from the outset.
So,
I think
you know,
it
he's
was
always going to
that,
be tainted, isn't he?
yeah, I think that stemmed from the actual scene where
Yeah.
Jones told him that his family was deceased, that they'd all died. And he said, you're just going to have to get on with it, basically. And Jeremy called him a hard bastard. And from that on, Jones was
Didn't
insulted.
like it, did
That
he?
was it.
No, incredible. So, so with Jones then, so what did he do that perhaps makes us suspicious of him? Obviously, he said he was looking for something to go and arrest Bamber for, so he's already coloured in that way in terms of wanting Jeremy to be guilty. But what else did he do that is called into question?
Well, one particular incident regards the scratch marks which were later discovered underneath the mantel shelf that the police say were caused by the silencer being on the rifle. Now, we can
Yeah.
completely undermine that now, but on the 14th of August, Stan Jones, Cook and Miller all attended White House Farm with Anne Eaton, and during the course of the time they were there, Stan Jones, according to Anne Eaton's statement, took his pocket knife out of his pocket and a handkerchief and literally scraped paint off the underside of the mantel shelf. Now, he says nothing about this, although there is a reference number on the Holmes Index for SB1, which is a paint sample. Stan Jones always has never said anything about it, is denied it, but he did say, according to Anne Eaton, that she hadn't seen that. So why would he say that?
Wow, that's really
Makes no
dodgy, isn't it?
sense, does it? If he was doing something that was cautious, that was needed to make for proper forensic reasons, he wouldn't have told Anne Eaton, you haven't seen this.
And I think it's important also to point out that these or some paint samples from the underside of the mantle did eventually find their way onto a silencer, but they weren't there when the silencers were first examined. It wasn't until the 25th of September, when they were examined for a third time, that suddenly 25 flecks of paint appeared on the end of the
I
silencer.
discovered for the very first time, which incidentally matched exactly the paint and the layers on the mantelpiece, underside the mantelpiece. But then again, this is another bone of contention because the police say they took a single sample of paint. But yeah, they didn't. Because all three officers who were present at that time with Anne Eaton all have, throughout the documentation, a paint sample referenced from the underside of the mantle. So there's Miller, who has a paint sample, RM1, and this is on the Holmes Index. So this isn't, you
It's
know,
not
this isn't,
disputable.
no, it's undisputable. So there's Miller with his reference, RM1. There's Cook with his reference, RWC1, paint sample, and then this Jones with his paint sample, SB1. It's just...
What are they doing?
Companies deny there's three. There's one paint sample. But we have to remember Essex Police are very good at merging multiple things into a single thing, as they did with the silencers.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I mean, we will move on to Miller shortly, but sticking with Jones for a moment, it seems that when he's interviewed, he kind of forgets things, doesn't he? And then suddenly remembers things that perhaps he shouldn't be saying. So it was in 2002 when he was interviewed and admitted that there was a suicide note found at the scene. Is that right?
yeah, it was during his interview with Stoke and Church officers during the inquiry, and he basically on his they were asking him, they were actually questioning him about, did he look for a silencer at the house on the day? Now, he didn't answer that question. He just said, you don't go searching in cupboards when you found a note that says, I've just killed myself. And it's like,
Where's that note?
really? Where's this note then? We haven't got that note. There is nothing in the documentation that says those words. Where is it? Where's this apparent suicide note? So he actually revealed that there was this suicide note, what we had no idea about.
Yeah, if you
So
remember that in 2002, he obviously knew about it in 1985. It should have been very
exactly,
clear in his memory. So why, if he was being an honest police officer, which is what we're talking about, the lies of police officers, why didn't he mention that to anyone?
we don't know. Nobody seems to know. It just
And you
came
can,
out of the blue in 2002.
and it's worth saying, you can actually see a note on the dressing table in where Sheila was staying at White House Farm in the crime scene photos. You can't see what's written on it, but there is a
You
note
can
there.
see there's a
Is
note
that
there.
it? Is
There's
that the
also a
note?
note on top of the kitchen mantel shelf. And we don't know what that is either. We do know that they did seize various notes and pieces of paper from the house.
Yeah,
It's not disclosed what those are.
no,
So they
exactly.
disclose what a couple of them are, trying to muddy the water and trying to fudge things to manipulate the defence and to try and, make out that these things were of nothing of importance. But for Jones to say the words that it said, I've just killed myself.
They've not
Obviously, that
revealed
must be
anything of
something.
similar nature to us at all.
No, exactly. But there's also the telephone issue, Emma, the telephone in the kitchen, because also in 2002, Jones was talking about the telephone. Now, he didn't say in the crime scene photographs, it's shown with the handset next to the telephone on the work counter. But that's not where he said it was. He said the phone was hanging down. And he didn't say this just once, he said it several times in interview.
Yeah,
He also said that he wouldn't have touched the phone, not in that state. So what
yeah,
did that mean? Because the photographs of the telephone show it pristine. In fact, it's the cleanest thing in the house. It's
yeah.
absolutely sparklingly clean. So why did he say that? Was it blood? But we know that a police officer, CSI Harris, used the phone. We've discovered that in evidence to phone Simpson, but as it was requested to do. But that was the only phone that was working in the house, so he must have used that phone. So did Jones admit that it was full of blood, and then was it cleaned by Harris? And so that's why they didn't forensically examine it and didn't test it for fingerprints or anything like that. We don't know, because they have never been honest. If they'd just
No,
been
exactly.
honest about their actions on the day, then this would have, a man wouldn't have been in jail almost 40 years for a crime he didn't commit if the police had just been honest. The jury
Exactly.
had a right to know. If that phone was contaminated with blood, well, it's a crime scene, of course it's going to be. It's not going to affect the jury one way or the other, but they had a right to know if that was the case. So they were denied
Exactly.
that evidence. They were denied that possibility of fingerprints being retrieved from the phone. But Jones seems to admit in 2002 that it was, because he said it was in his state. But then again, the Metropolitan Police officers are at fault, because why didn't they pursue it? Why
They
didn't they
didn't pursue
pursue
the
that?
suicide note. They didn't pursue anything, did they?
Didn't pursue anything, no, nothing at all.
So, okay, so that's Jones. And if anyone wants to hear more about Jones, because that's just really the headlines, that's, the tip of the iceberg. We do have a podcast specifically about him and his actions in the case. That is on season 1, so you can find that there. But if we move on to Miller now, D.I. Robert Miller, what was his part and what do we say about him?
Yeah, Robert Miller also attended the scene on the day. He's been on countless programs saying that Jeremy is guilty. It's on television documentaries and everything. But his evidence changed over time. We are going to produce a podcast specifically about Miller in the very near future. But one example of his malfeasance in public office is that he was adding entries to his pocketbook. So this is after the event. So he added an entry that he was at White House Farm taking a paint sample. Now that was added, that was confirmed by Dr. Baxendale in 1991, who did electromagnetic testing to see if he can tell from the study of paper and everything if entries have been added at a later date. And he said in 1991 that that had been added, but nothing was done about it. But yet, several years ago, as I said before, we found this reference to a paint sample with his forensic reference identity number on it. So what is going on? This is another issue where they're not being honest.
Yeah, he's covering his tracks in some way if he's adding things much later on to try and legitimise his activities, isn't he?
That's it, but he wasn't questioned about why he was fabricating his pocketbook. He wasn't questioned about it. It was just, oh, he's added it later.
And there's another one that, I think has suggested that he suspected Jeremy from the very beginning, where he didn't at all, did he? Because he actually expressed some disgust that the family were making suggestions that Jeremy was involved, and he was, they've obviously got an ulterior motive. They're very much interested parties in Jeremy being convicted, and he was actually disgusted by the suggestion. So he didn't suspect Jeremy from the beginning at all.
No, but something changed his opinion. So was it that he was got out by other police officers? Was it when Ainsley took over the investigation? We would know more if we would have had all the police officers' statements from those who were at the scene. But we've got very, very, very few statements. I think we've got 5 from the day, from the 7th of August, from police officers who were at the scene. We've no handwritten ones. The vast majority of police statements are dated for the first statement on the 16th of September. That is impossible. Though it would assist us if we had all the statements available to us that were created on the day by the officers who were at the scene. But of the considerable number of officers who were at the scene, we have a very, very small percentage of statements that have been disclosed to us. There's no handwritten statements in amongst those. Now, we believe that they are part of Sheila's investigation, the murder-suicide investigation, which is a reference number of SC 68885 on the police documents. However, when it then became that it became Jeremy's case after his first arrest, SC 78685, there's thousands of police statements in that. They can't make enough statements then. But when it was Sheila's case, we have very, very few, a fraction of what there should be. And so therefore we can only assume that because they are in Sheila's investigation, that's the reason they have not been disclosed. But they're key. They are key statements from all these officers who were initially at the scene.
There's no reason to not disclose them if everything
asked for them time and time again. We have asked CPS for them, Essex Police for them, and that request is now with the Criminal Case Review Commission for Sheila's file. So whether we get that or not is another story. But
it's the handwritten ones we need, because they're the honest recounting of what happened on that point. A typed up statement from a month later is absolutely no good to anybody, because they've
because these aren't doing nothing while 5-6 weeks passes. These police officers are busy on other jobs. They're busy out doing their other policing work, and come back to somebody 6 weeks later and say, give a detailed account of what happened. All they've got to rely on then is their memory and their pocket notebook. And we haven't even had the pocket notebooks disclosed from all the officers who were at the scene. But as we can categorically state, we know there was handwritten statements, as we pointed out before, that Bewes said that he and Mayo made handwritten statements and put them on Jones's desk. This is Stan Jones's desk that night. That's the night of the 7th of August. So where are they?
Exactly. And as we said earlier, that Bewes' statement is likely to talk about what he genuinely saw in the window, not what he recounted later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The same with taking the paint samples and everything. I believe Miller probably was honest in his initial statements that he made as and when he conducted actions in the early days, but that changed. Why that changed, I don't know, but he's been on so many television programs waving his fingers about saying that Jeremy's guilty. I don't know. I don't know, really can't pinpoint when that began.
Yeah. He's very unconvincing in these TV documentaries, isn't
Very
he?
unconvincing, shaking his head in a no motion.
Yeah,
I
well,
think
saying we've got the right man in
Jeremy's
jail.
guilty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Okay, so I think we'll leave it there for today, but please join us next time for part 3 of the Police Lies miniseries, where we will be looking at none other than Detective Superintendent Michael Ainsley. We will see you then.
If you want to lend your support to Jeremy Bamber, you can write to him in the UK using the number A5352AC, HM Wakefield, 5 Love Lane, Wakefield, WF2 9AG, or see our website for details at www.jeremy-bamber.co.uk.